We have had so many interesting, colorful, memorable Disney villains over the years. Everyone has had their favorites, and I have a feeling that Maleficent is pretty high up there for most fans. Many think of her as one of the greatest, if not the greatest Disney villain of all time. Even the Disney company seems to feel this way. In media featuring the villains teaming up, Maleficent is usually the leader, with only a few exceptions. And why is that? Why has Maleficent gone down in history as the best of the baddies? Let's take a look at her long, evil career and see. There have been plenty of variations on the Sleeping Beauty story over the years. The Disney version in particular is based on The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood by Charles Perrault. Further inspiration, particularly the movie soundtrack, came from the Tchaikovsky ballet, which was also based on the Perrault Fairytale. A king and queen are overjoyed to have a daughter and have a celebration for the kingdom. They invite the 7 fairies of the realm to attend, but neglect to invite an 8th elderly one. This is because the old fairy lives far off in the distant mountains, and hasn't been seen in so long, everyone assumes she's dead. It's incredibly awkward when she does arrive, alive and bitter, to the party. The time comes for the fairies to give blessings to the princess. Assuming she's been intentionally snubbed, the old fairy lays a curse on the baby instead. She declares that the girl will prick her finger on a spindle and die. One of the good fairies, although unable to completely undo the curse, changes it so the princess will merely sleep for 100 years instead of dying, and that she'll be awoken by a prince. 100 years is still a long time, so the king has all the spinning wheels in the kingdom burned. 16 years later, the princess comes upon an old woman in a tower, using a spinning wheel. The narration specifies that the old woman is innocent, and has been unaware of the curse or the efforts the king has taken to protect his daughter. The curious princess does prick herself, and the curse is fulfilled. The fairies put the rest of the castle to sleep for 100 years and raise a wall of thorns around it for protection. At the end of 100 years, a prince finds it, and the thorns part way for him. He finds the princess in the tower and kisses her, waking her up along with everyone else. There's also a weird second half about the prince's mother being half ogre and wanting to eat the princess, but Disney didn't adapt that section. As with many Disney productions, the fairy tale was changed when it was adapted. The evil main fairy, who appears only briefly at the beginning, now plays an active role in the rest of the story and is directly responsible for the princess pricking her finger. She is the one who grows thorns around the castle, not to protect the sleeping people inside, but to stop the prince from breaking the spell. The prince, who's met the princess before in the Disney version, actually has to fight his way to the tower where the princess sleeps. The evil fairy, now named Maleficent, went through several revisions. Some early concept art shows her as an old crone. Other art has her looking a bit younger with a pair of antennae. A few show her looking almost identical to the queen from Snow White. Her final design, tall, regal, sinister with a horned hood, was by legendary animator Mark Davis. Davis had also initially sketched her with a black and red robe, which was changed to black and purple by another animator, Ivan Earl, who played a large role in the general look and feel of Sleeping Beauty. Very early in the story sessions, the animators realized that Maleficent would be difficult to work with if they didn't give her someone to work with. Although she is always a driving force in the plot, a lot of the time she's watching from behind the scenes. Her scenes were falling flat. Mark Davis decided to give her a bird sidekick to play off of. First it was a hawk, then a vulture, until they finally settled on a raven. Later drafts added an army of little goblin creatures, Goons, to do her bidding. Disney's version definitely gave Maleficent's character a much more active role in the story. The original version has the evil fairy more or less leave once she's put the curse on the baby princess. Disney has Maleficent continuously keep watch over the kingdom, not only to make sure the curse is fulfilled, but to make sure it can't be broken. She even transforms into a dragon as a final obstacle. Several plot points were lifted from Disney's Snow White, including an idea that had been planned for Snow White's prince, which was cut. In early drafts of Snow White, the prince would have been imprisoned by the Wicked Queen and have to fight his way out of her castle. This was finally used for Prince Philip. Meanwhile, a deleted alternate version of the spindle scene would have had Maleficent enticing Aurora to touch the needle, saying it was a magic wish-granting wheel. You may remember the Queen used the same trick to get Snow White to eat the poison apple. One other deleted idea had the fairies cast a protection spell over the castle that no evil thing that walks, flies, or crawls can enter. Undeterred, Maleficent transforms herself into a large purple fish that is caught in the moat, gaining her access. As in the fairy tale, Maleficent's entire motivation for cursing Princess Aurora is not being invited to the party. Unlike the fairy tale, she was deliberately excluded. A deleted earlier version of the scene has King Stefan explicitly say that wherever Maleficent goes, sorrow follows. One has to wonder what would have happened if they did just invite Maleficent in the first place. It's easy to imagine Maleficent finding some other excuse to curse the baby, or someone else who happened to look at her the wrong way. She could have also given Aurora some sort of ironically twisted gift, one that would only be considered a blessing in Maleficent's own evil eyes. In other words, whether the king did or didn't invite Maleficent, they were potentially looking at trouble. After Aurora is cursed, the princess appears to be the target of all Maleficent's wrath for the following 16 years. Although the curse is supposed to happen on Aurora's 16th birthday, she is hidden in the woods by the three good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. Maleficent is most likely so angry because if the princess is off the radar, there's no way of ensuring the curse will be fulfilled. I imagine if she was still in Maleficent's sight the whole time, the evil fairy would be relatively more even-tempered. Although Aurora is Maleficent's main target along with Prince Philip, the only person who can break the spell, Maleficent's true enemies are the good fairies. In fact, many consider the fairies to be the true main characters, with Aurora and Philip acting more as plot devices. Aurora never gets a chance to develop as a character since she's asleep for a good portion of the movie, and while Philip is definitely a step up from previous Disney princes, he's still not all that noteworthy personality-wise. Maleficent never actually has any real direct interactions with Aurora in the movie. Even in the scene where Maleficent commands Aurora to touch the needle, the princess is completely in a trance. Maleficent's relation with the good fairies, on the other hand, is very interesting. They clearly have a long, bitter history together. Fauna mentions that Maleficent always ruins Flora's nicest flowers with her frosts. This could mean that while the good fairies represent life, Maleficent could represent death. But while death isn't exactly a positive thing, it's very necessary for life to go on. It's more likely that Maleficent just destroys Flora's gifts because she can. Acts of evil are the only thing that make her feel good.
Maleficent doesn't know anything about love, or kindness, or the joy of helping others. You know, sometimes I don't think she's really very happy.
Although Fauna's speculation about Maleficent not being very happy is meant to show her as being lovably naive, she's not wrong. Even in her brief moments where she's on top, Maleficent is never really happy for very long. Other Disney villains relish in their supposed victories. Jafar loves being in command of Agrabah. Hades is ready to live it up on Mount Olympus. When we see Maleficent sitting on her throne after cursing Aurora and capturing Philip, she's wearing the same frown as always. Her minions dance around a bonfire below, but she's as miserable as ever. The only thing to give her a little pleasure is taunting Philip in his cell, but even if she did that every day, it would probably get old very fast. In fact, that's probably why she decides to prolong Philip's torment. She reveals that she does plan to free him in 100 years, where he'll feebly hobble to the castle and finally awaken the Sleeping Beauty. It's a pretty messed up scenario, and as far as physical and emotional torment goes, Maleficent is really bringing her A-game with this one. She's been furious for 16 years, now she'll be spiteful for 100. I love Maleficent's inherent spitefulness. Sleeping Beauty is a very pure retelling of a classic fairy tale. Good is good, bad is bad, grass is green, sky is blue, false is false, and true is true. Maleficent is a villain because the story needs a villain. And I'm not saying that every movie needs to have this basic black and white morality, but it really does make Maleficent stand out as the Mistress of All Evil. She's one of the few major Disney villains who is evil simply because she likes being evil. The major Disney villains, even the most despicable ones, have some sort of motivation. The Wicked Queen is jealous of Snow White's natural beauty. Cruella de Vil, Prince John, and Ratcliffe are greedy and vain. Jafar, Ursula, Scar, and Hades want power. Gaston can't take being rejected. Frollo has a laundry list of issues. But Maleficent? She's evil because she is. Just to be clear, there are some other villains who fall under this category, but they are generally smaller in the scale of the story. Madame Mim and Chernabog, for example, are only in one scene of their respective movies. And also, to be clear, I know Maleficent is a fairy, and in Fae lore, the fair folk have their own morality and customs. Within the narrative itself, though, the only other fairies we see are the traditional friendly ones seen throughout other Disney media. As far as the movie story is concerned, Maleficent is a decidedly bad apple. While a great deal of credit is owed to Mark Davis for his design and directing animation of Maleficent, her voice actress also played a large role in bringing this villainess to life. Eleanor Audley had previously voiced Cinderella's stepmother, Lady Tremaine, another cold, cruel character. She would go on to voice one more character for Disney, the iconic fortune teller Madame Leota in the Haunted Mansion.
Oh, they're hopeless. A disgrace to the forces of evil.
Assisting Maleficent first and foremost is her raven Diablo. He is quite possibly the only thing Maleficent actually loves and shows any affection towards. It helps that Diablo is much smarter than her other henchmen, who we'll talk about shortly. As stated earlier, Diablo was created to give Maleficent someone to talk to, a confidant. The earliest concept art shows an intimidating hawk, who was then changed to a talking vulture. A story reel shows the vulture would have been more of a comic bungler who spoke with a Bronx-sounding accent. One scene would have had a traveling fair set up outside the castle. Maleficent disguises herself as a fortune teller, and the vulture is her barker. He lures Aurora into a tent, where Maleficent plans on tricking her into touching the spindle. Before she can, the greedy vulture sends Prince Philip into the tent, valuing scamming the prince out of a few coins over Maleficent's victory. The villainess, of course, doesn't take this very well. Unlike the vulture, Diablo never speaks, only making squawks provided by seasoned voice actor Dallas McKennon. While Maleficent's other henchmen are unable to find Aurora's hiding place after 16 years, Maleficent sends out her raven to look, which she probably should have done in the first place. Diablo is able to find her instantly, although it helps that the fairies essentially put up a giant neon sign by accident. Later on, Diablo is able to notice the fairies hiding around the dungeon when even Maleficent doesn't detect them. When he tries to warn Maleficent of Philip's escape, he is ultimately turned to stone by Merryweather, the most impulsive of the good fairies. Maleficent's shocked reaction to her stone bird can be interpreted as her being heartbroken over her only friend being essentially killed. That's certainly how I used to view it. But upon rewatching the scene, it seems that she's more angry that Philip and the good fairies have escaped. Contrast her reaction to Ursula when her eels are vaporized. The sea witch might turn her attention back to Ariel and Eric, but she at least takes a few seconds to mourn her little poopsies. I'm not saying that Maleficent never loved Diablo at all, but I think there's an extent to how much she can love anyone. Maleficent's other henchmen are her little goblin creatures, officially called Goons. She has seemingly hundreds of these strange monsters, all of them beastly, but at times almost unconventionally cute. They were inspired by paintings of hell by Hieronymus Bosch, which features some truly frightening demons. These half-beast, half-men monsters led to some wonderful character designs by Bill Peet, who turned them from the embodiment of nightmares to amusing imps. The leader Goon, or at least the only one who can speak, has the face of a pig and the gravelly voice of Candy Candido. The other Goons are voiced by Pinto Colvig and Bob Amsbury.
Everywhere. We all did.
Among those numerous other Goons, we have other pig-faced ones, a tall goat-like Goon, an alligator Goon, some bird Goons, and my personal favorite, one who looks like a cross between a frog and a bat. It was actually Walt Disney's idea to have only one of the Goons speak. According to the 1958 book, Walt Disney, The Art of Animation, Walt felt that the original Goon voices were too funny, and they needed to be menacing first and funny second. A song was actually written for the Goons called Evil Evil, but it was most likely cut for this reason. Speaking of cut songs, there was also a song written for the scene where Aurora is lured to the spindle called Follow Your Heart. I'm guessing it would have been a hypnotic siren song. One of the weirdest, creepiest looking Goons can be seen in various concept art pieces and even a comic adaptation, but he never made it into the movie. This one had two heads, with one smaller head appearing to grow on top of the other's head. Another early idea had the Goons act as guards by disguising themselves among Maleficent's stone gargoyles. I assume this was one of the more gag-oriented ideas Walt thought was too funny for the little monsters. Maleficent's Goons are not known for their intelligence. They searched for Aurora for 16 years but failed because they were looking for a baby the entire time, not reasoning that she would have grown over the years. Other times, though, when given simpler tasks, they're remarkably efficient. They are able to subdue Prince Philip in a matter of seconds, and later on, when Philip escapes the dungeon, if not for the fairies' help, the Goons could have easily stopped or even killed him. They are also, apparently, excellent spies. The fairies have to take extra precautions when discussing their plans, for fear of some sinister forces listening. Since the Goons are able to search throughout the kingdom for 16 years, even if they ultimately fail, I can imagine they're at least good at hiding in different places. None of the Goons are ever named in the movie, but a stage adaptation aimed at young performers names 4 of them: Fumful, Pest, Blather, and Stench.
He says, and now for a quick ad break.
Maleficent's Goons are good at hiding and sneaking around the kingdom undetected. Although these imps are fictitious, there are real-life, unscrupulous people out there who are doing the same thing online, trying to pry into your private information. Luckily, for us in the real world, there's NordVPN. Many thanks to NordVPN for affiliating with me and helping with this channel. Normally, if you use public Wi-Fi, you might as well be announcing your presence with pink and blue sparks. Hackers can easily get your information on these networks. But with NordVPN, your files, browsing history, even your location are safely encrypted. No real-life goons are going to be able to see your precious information. One click is all it takes. Simple and efficient. NordVPN is remarkably affordable, and with this handy-dandy link I'm providing, you can get a 2-year plan with a major discount. Just go to this link I have up on screen and in the video's description, so you can browse with a sense of security. True love's kiss? Maybe not. But for those of us not living in the 14th century, it gets the job done. Maleficent was given her own movie in 2014. This one was live action and starred Angelina Jolie as the Dark Fairy. It was a retelling of the fairy tale, but skewed to make Maleficent not only the main character, but also more of a misunderstood antihero. A question the screenwriter, Linda Wolverton, thought about while writing the movie was, if Maleficent is a fairy, then where are her wings? This film set out to explain where those wings went, and just why Maleficent is so evil in the first place. In this version, the real villain is actually Aurora's father, King Stephen, played by Sharlto Copley. Let's back up for a second. Maleficent is the protector of an enchanted swampland called the Moors, which multiple kingdoms want for their own. She meets Stephen when they are children, and at the time he's just a peasant. They have a brief romance, but his ambition to become royalty ultimately drives them apart. The ailing King Henry, played by Kenneth Branagh, wanting to possess the Moors, orders Maleficent to be hunted down and killed. Stephen wants to be king, but he still can't bring himself to kill Maleficent, so he cuts off her wings and presents them to the king as proof that he supposedly killed her. This is enough to make him the new monarch when King Henry dies shortly after. One draft of the screenplay took things further, and has King Henry refuse to make him king, so Stephen just kills him, becoming king anyway. Maleficent gave her love and trust to someone else, only for them to betray her for their own greed. This is what hardens her heart, and inspires her to place the curse on Stephen's infant daughter. And yet, this Maleficent is not as evil as she wants the kingdom to believe. After enacting her vengeance, she finds herself watching over the baby when this movie's equivalent of the 3 good fairies proved to be completely incompetent at the task. Whether or not Maleficent likes it, she becomes instantly attached to the child, although it takes her a while to admit that's what's happened. Aurora eventually comes to see the Dark Fairy as her own mother, with true love winning in the end, as it so often does in fairy tales. This is a far cry from the animated movie, where Aurora didn't even realize Maleficent existed. Alongside this Maleficent is her raven Diablo, played by Sam Riley. Well, a raven is his true form, but Maleficent often turns him into whatever suits her needs. A human to talk to, for example, or a fierce animal to fight alongside. It is Diablo who gets the honor of turning into a dragon. The second movie also sees him turn into a terrifying bear-bird hybrid. The sequel, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, introduces a new villainess, Prince Philip's mother, Queen Ingrid, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. I was pleasantly surprised that they chose to adapt this plot element from the original fairy tale, although it's done very loosely. For one thing, she doesn't want to eat Aurora. She's not part ogre, but 100% human. Human to a fault. Her hatred of the fair folk goes back to her childhood when her own kingdom was starving, while the fair folk had plenty of food just over the horizon. Her brother, at least according to her, was killed by the magical creatures, and her father was overthrown by the starving kingdom. She wants to take the Moors by force now. This puts her at war with Maleficent, Aurora, and the rest of the Dark Fae. Please note that despite the title of the sequel, Maleficent doesn't really do anything evil in this one. It's very far removed from the animated film at this point. I definitely had some mixed thoughts on these ones myself. Of course, I like when characters are given depth and nuance, but I think Maleficent is an exception for me. Like I said earlier, she is one of the only major Disney villains who has no motivation for her actions outside of pettiness and a love for being evil. While this Maleficent definitely has a traumatic backstory, she's really only in evil mode for a short portion of the film. Most of the focus is on what made her become evil, and then almost instantly after that, what redeemed her. It makes for an interesting character study, but I wish it had been on a different villain, or a different dark fairy archetype. They're not bad movies, but it just doesn't feel like the Disney Maleficent. And now for the other live-action movie franchise. Both the first novel and first movie in the Descendants series premiered in 2015. The Disney villains and their offspring have been banished to a secluded island, and the series focuses on the efforts of their children, both villains and heroes alike, to live together in peace. The main character is Mal, played by Dove Cameron, daughter of Maleficent, played by Kristen Chenoweth. Should Mal embrace the good within her and strive to help everyone be better people? Or should she listen to her mother and take over the hero's kingdom? It's a Disney movie, so you pretty much know how it's going to play out. As much as I generally love Kristen Chenoweth, she does not make a good Maleficent. Although the spiteful and often petty nature of Maleficent still comes through on paper, Chenoweth delivers the lines in a bubbly, zany fashion, rather than the cold, sardonic villainess we know and love. It's an incredibly broad performance, and while I thought that kind of thing worked for characters like Cruella and Jafar in the movie, it was the wrong choice for Maleficent. She and her daughter do get a pretty fun show tune together, though, by Andrew Lippa. Lippa had previously written the song My New Philosophy for the Broadway revival of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, a song that Chenoweth performed as Sally Brown, a role which in turn won her a Tony Award. So that's one good thing I can say about the movie, and probably the only thing I really liked. I might be editorializing here a bit more than I've done at other points, and it's true that I'm not really the target audience for this kind of thing. If you really want to see Kristen Chenoweth and Dove Cameron as an evil mother-daughter act, I'd recommend Hairspray Live instead. In the third Descendants movie, Mal faces off against Princess Aurora's daughter, Audrey, played by Sarah Jeffrey. The girl's been nursing a grudge against Mal ever since the first movie, when Mal bewitched Audrey's boyfriend, Ben, to fall in love with her instead. Even after the spell wears off, Ben stays with Mal, and you really can't blame Audrey for being pissed. In her vulnerable state, she is compelled to take Maleficent's staff, unleashing her inner dark side. In the end, because of the staff's influence and Mal realizing that she's partially to blame, Audrey is revived and redeemed. King Stefan does not appear in the Descendants franchise, but it seems that making one of Aurora's parents an antagonist is something of a trend. Aurora's mother, and Audrey's grandmother, Queen Leah, played by Judith Maxey, is not a villain per se, but she's incredibly demanding and harsh to her granddaughter. Her attitude also plays a big role in what drives Audrey to become influenced by Maleficent's staff. Descendants 3 reveals that Mal's father is none other than Hades. As you will see, Hades and Maleficent have actually been paired by Disney a few times. You know who the real villain of Descendants is? The one no one ever acknowledges? Whoever had a child with Dopey. They never say how old any of the dwarves are, but Dopey looks and acts like a toddler. The whole she's really 700 years old argument has never worked with anime girls, and it shouldn't work with Dopey either. In the Once Upon a Time TV series, Maleficent is played by Kristen Bauer von Straten as one of the many displaced Fairytale characters. Most of her appearances are in the show's 4th season, working alongside Ursula and Cruella de Vil. Back in animation, Maleficent made a few appearances on the House of Mouse series. Surprisingly, she was not featured as a main player in the House of Villains movie, where the bad guys plot to take over the show. Jafar, Cruella, Ursula, and Captain Hook seem to be the leaders of that one, with Maleficent merely joining in as an ensemble member once the takeover began. Perhaps even for all her pettiness, she felt that taking over a nightclub was a bit beneath her. She played a larger role in the episode Halloween with Hades, where the Lord of the Underworld is smitten with her. Mickey overhears and recommends Hades act nice to attract Maleficent. To demonstrate, Mickey gives Maleficent the world's friendliest greeting, which somehow doesn't get him fried on the spot.
Gee, I hope you're happy, because we love to make things funny. Oh, gosh!
Yes, very happy indeed, and giddy with fun.
Whoa.
Although she does give Mickey an initial scowl, she still restrains herself, since if she's at the House of Mouse, it means she was invited. Thus, she's willing to put up with a little nonsense, even if Mickey was pushing his luck in that moment. Hades decides to model himself after Mickey, which gets him shut down hard by Maleficent. She changes her mind about him when Hades tries to incinerate Mickey as vengeance. The way to a dark fairy's heart is through blind fury, apparently. And that, Mal, is how I met your mother. In her House of Mouse appearances, Maleficent was voiced by Lois Nettleton. In most other modern-day appearances, unless noted otherwise, Maleficent is voiced by Suzanne Blakesley. Although some Disney villains have had long careers in comics, Maleficent has rarely appeared. A couple years ago, I did a video on Maleficent's appearances in a few newspaper comics about Christmas. To briefly recap, one story has Maleficent succeed in putting Aurora to sleep again, with seemingly no cure. Ludwig von Drake proves to be an unexpected time-traveling hero. Another story has Maleficent and Madame Mim literally kidnap the Christmas spirit. The final one has Maleficent's head goon reform and become Santa's bodyguard. One Italian story that has never been published in English was a Disney retelling of the Neverending Story. Mickey is tasked with saving the world from the Nothing, a force that threatens to completely wipe them out. Maleficent, functioning as Gamork the Wolf from the original story, tries to let the Nothing succeed. Even if it wipes her and her villain friends out as well, it's still a victory over the heroes in her eyes. In the end, Mickey succeeds, and Maleficent is the one who ends up getting overtaken by the Nothing. Several other villains make cameos along the way, including a few relatively obscure ones like Madame Medusa, Ratigan, and Sir Hiss. Another rare Maleficent comic appearance was in a manga called Kilala Princess. The series follows a girl named Kilala Reno who goes on a magical journey through various Disney franchises, meeting plenty of princesses along the way. When she meets Aurora, it's been a year since Philip woke her from her enchanted sleep. As the kingdom celebrates, a mysterious woman named Lady Maleficent visits with a rare rose as a gift. It should come to no shock that this is really Maleficent, given that this is a video about her and that she barely bothered to change her name. After Kilala stops Aurora from touching the cursed flower, Maleficent bides her time a bit more. Later on, she reveals her true form and makes more poison thorns grow around the castle. Kilala is pricked and falls into her own enchanted slumber. Her love interest kisses her awake, and as always, the power of love prevails, apparently wiping Maleficent out on the spot. In the Kingdom Keepers book series, which tells of several kids battling for the safety of the Disney theme parks after hours, Maleficent acts as one of the main villains alongside Chernabog. In 2008, a short sequel to the original movie was published called Maleficent's Revenge. This one takes place 2 years after Aurora's awakening, with the whole kingdom celebrating once again. A lunar eclipse is taking place, which apparently weakens some fairies' powers and the spells they've cast. Because of this, Diablo the Raven, previously... There's an actual crow outside right now. Diablo the Raven, previously turned to stone, is now able to break free and seek out what's left of his mistress. He finds her staff and pecks it, which apparently is enough to bring Maleficent back from the dead. Maleficent turns all of Aurora's kingdom to stone, except for Aurora herself. The princess asks Maleficent to put her to sleep in exchange for freeing the rest of the kingdom. Once restored, Prince Philip fights Maleficent once more, this time tricking her dragon form into biting her own tail, poisoning herself, and saving Aurora. Later on, in 2017, a short prequel was published called A Message for Maleficent. In the story, King Stephen and Queen Leah are getting married. Merryweather draws the short straw and has to deliver a wedding invitation to Maleficent. The journey proves to be a perilous one, with steep cliffs, scary sounds, and troublemaking goons. Eventually, Merryweather is so frightened that she leaves the invitation outside Maleficent's castle and runs home. Maleficent never does receive the invitation, as 2 of her goons scamper off with it instead. Although the story was written almost 60 years after the movie came out, it sheds a little light on Maleficent's anger at not being invited to Aurora's ceremony. It's not the first time this has happened. It should also be noted that in the movie, Merryweather is the one to bluntly tell Maleficent she wasn't wanted. Perhaps both fairies are still nursing their grudges. I typically list video game appearances next, but I think doing theme parks first would suit this video better. And Maleficent has certainly had a strong presence in the Disney parks, practically since Disneyland first opened. Disneyland opened in 1955 during what would prove to be Sleeping Beauty's lengthy production. Although the movie itself would not come out until 1959, Walt Disney chose it to represent the park as a whole with the centerpiece, the Sleeping Beauty Castle. In 1957, to drum up excitement for the movie and to put an attraction inside the castle, an elaborate walkthrough was added within the castle's walls, telling the story of Sleeping Beauty. The walkthrough has changed several times over the years. The first version focused a lot on Maleficent and the scarier aspects of the story. Maleficent is first seen in this version standing over Aurora, who has just collapsed after breaking her finger. Diablo is perched on her shoulder, happily flapping his wings. Guests pass a series of barred doors afterward, and if they look through the keyholes, they can see the goons staring back at them, complete with blinking eyes. This was a simple effect done by placing mirrors in the goons' eyes so they would blink when guests blinked. The effect proved to be so interesting that it was quickly boarded up when guests took too long to marvel at the little monsters. Maleficent is shown summoning her many evil spirits and demons to celebrate her triumph, and guests also get a glimpse at her torture chamber. Although we never see any torture devices in the movie, it's not surprising to see them in her possession. Even after Prince Philip awakens his princess, the final corridor has Maleficent's shadow cast on the wall, implying she is just around the corner. Like the blinking goons, this was removed shortly after the attraction opened, since it ended up scaring children too much. Talk about a simpler time. The walkthrough was significantly redesigned in 1977, looking more akin to the Macy's-esque window displays on Main Street. The mostly two-dimensional characters were replaced with doll-like versions that have often been compared to Barbie dolls. It was much lighter in tone, and Maleficent appeared a bit less as a result. She can first be seen placing a curse on the baby as the aghast royal family looks on. Later, she is seen shouting at her goons for their incompetence. Finally, she is seen battling Prince Philip as a dragon. At some point in the late 90s or very early 2000s, this impressive dragon scene was covered up, possibly due to some sort of malfunction. Whether or not they plan to fix the dragon scene at some point is unknown, as the walkthrough was closed in 2001. This is largely attributed to the terrorist attacks on 9/11 and the cost-cutting that followed as park attendance decreased. In 2008, the walkthrough reopened and was completely redone again. This new, current version is based closely on the original 1957 attraction, and it's truly a hidden gem. Some scenes are practically direct reproductions of the original, like Maleficent standing over the fallen princess. Her menacing shadow at the end has also made a welcome return. A new scene shows her transforming into the dragon, ready to take on Philip. The keyholes with the goons did not return, but the doors that held them did. They will now pop up from behind windows to startle guests in that section, although I've never been able to figure out just how their motion detection works. Sometimes they prefer to stay hidden. Based on some YouTube videos, it seems other guests can't always figure it out either. For a time, Maleficent could also be found in the castle at Tokyo, deep in its hidden dungeons. This truly spectacular-looking walkthrough attraction, the Cinderella Castle Mystery Tour, was open from 1986 to 2006. Inside, guests would encounter one villain after the next, along with assorted ghosts and ghouls. Surprisingly, Maleficent was not the main villain. The instigator of the whole event was the Magic Mirror, and the final villain to be fought was the Horned King. This is presumably because The Black Cauldron had recently been released in theaters, and its generally dark tone worked very well for this attraction. Maleficent actually had a somewhat minor role, all things considered, even though she appears on the sign to the attraction. She is first seen in a portrait near the beginning of the tour. About halfway through, her goons menace guests at a fountain area, appearing in the water and poking out of crevices. After escaping the goons, guests pass her castle on the Forbidden Mountains, with ghosts swirling around and lightning filling the sky. Maleficent can be seen standing atop the highest tower. A large dragon is encountered a little later, which is somewhat reminiscent of Maleficent's final form in the movie, but the dragon looks very different, and is more interested in defending its treasure hoard than truly antagonizing the guests. To promote the attraction's opening, a dance show was performed outside the castle for 2 weeks called Mystery of Cinderella Castle. Unlike the attraction, the show had Maleficent as the main villain. Interestingly, she's seen in a black and red robe here, looking closer to Mark Davis's initial design. In the show's opening, Maleficent's evil, dancing soldiers appear to be throwing a princess out of the castle and barring her from re-entering. The dialogue is all in Japanese, and it's unclear if this is meant to be Princess Aurora or a different princess who resembles her. Luckily for the Aurora-type princess, a Philip-type hero arrives on the scene along with his squires, Donald and Goofy, and his horse that walks on 2 legs. Ugh. Donald, who wears a pan as a helmet, is the lesser of the 2 squires, and is often seen cowering in fear throughout the show. Maleficent sends out her soldiers to fight the heroes, along with some other Disney villains. Creeper from the Black Cauldron can actually be seen in the mob. I guess the Horned King didn't fancy himself a dancer. Finally, Maleficent rises over the heroes and appears to be winning the battle. Her horns have also grown quite a bit. When all seems lost, Mickey shows up and blasts her with his sword. As always, good conquers evil, but I suppose it always helps to have a magic sword on your side. The castle at Disneyland Paris is also themed to Sleeping Beauty. It has its own walkthrough, although it focuses more on stained glass and tapestries rather than dioramas like in California. Maleficent and her minions are still featured in several displays, the most notable one being the petrified body of Diablo. Underneath the castle lurks an enormous dragon animatronic that will occasionally regard the guests with a few growls and some smoke. For the most part, this magnificent beast seems content to lie around and be admired by tourists. This dragon's design is based on the one found under the Tokyo Castle in the Mystery Tour. Like that dragon, this is actually not Maleficent, but a completely different dragon that was apparently found and raised by Merlin ages ago. It's easy to understand the confusion, since although it looks nothing like Maleficent, it's still a dragon under the Sleeping Beauty castle. The sign outside is also designed to look like Maleficent's horns. In fact, according to the attraction's lead designer, Imagineer Terry Hardin Jackson, Maleficent was originally supposed to be down there as well. Sort of. A huge dragon skeleton was supposed to block guests from being able to get too close to the animatronic dragon, and this one was supposed to be the dead body of Maleficent. The higher-ups apparently didn't understand, and vetoed the idea. Speaking of vetoed ideas, there were a couple attractions featuring Maleficent that ultimately went unbuilt. A Sleeping Beauty dark ride was considered when Walt Disney World was being planned, which would have been the scary Fantasyland ride instead of Snow White. I haven't found many details on this attraction, but the basic idea would be that in each scene, goons would be hiding somewhere, keeping their bright, watchful eyes on the guests. I've heard Maleficent would also show up several times, each encounter scarier than the last, with her final appearance being the dragon. As much as I love the terrifying Spook House-style Snow White attraction that opened with Disney World, I'm very curious as to how Sleeping Beauty would have been, to the point that I kind of wish we'd gotten that one instead. Before Disneyland's California Screamin' roller coaster was remodeled as the Incredicoaster, an idea for a villain ride was tossed around. The first launch tube would have looked like guests were careening into the dragon's open mouth. Maleficent plays a role in the interactive Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom game at Walt Disney World. The game's main villain, Hades, wants to use a magic artifact, the Crystal of the Magic Kingdom, to take over the park. When the crystal is shattered, he recruits other villains to track down the missing pieces. Maleficent is ordered a Get Out of the Underworld free card in exchange for helping. Once Maleficent gets the crystal shard, however, she opts to keep it for herself and use its power. Guests are able to stop her and her goons before she can pull off her evil plan. Merryweather even gets to turn Diablo to stone again. The best part is that Hades isn't that surprised or upset that Maleficent tried to betray him. He admits he knew what he was getting into and admires her villainy. They really are the Disney villains OTP, huh? Outside of attractions, Maleficent has been a live presence at the parks for many years, as a meetable character, a parade member, or as part of the park's many stage shows. Disney Dan did a really solid rundown of Maleficent's many different costume variations on his channel, which I'll put a link to in the description. I'll definitely be repeating some of that information, but I recommend watching his video too. It's very thorough. For a time in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a traveling review show called Disney on Parade. The 1973 edition of the show had a Sleeping Beauty segment, and photographs show us that Maleficent was there to cast her evil spell. I found some storyboards for the show that suggested an elaborate musical number for her and her minions. After successfully causing Aurora to prick her finger, Maleficent would have celebrated with her goons, devils, ghosts, spiders, and many other creeps. I'm not sure if this idea was actually implemented in the show itself, so if anyone was in the audience back then and wants to let me know, feel free. Maleficent went on to appear in various Disney on Ice productions. One I'd like to highlight is the Happy Birthday Donald Duck show, which premiered in 1984. While planning Donald's birthday party, Mickey and Minnie actually go out of their way to make sure the villains get invited. They've apparently learned from experience that doing so would be the safer option. The seven dwarves are tasked with delivering the invitations to the villain's villa. Over at the villa, Maleficent is hanging out with the Big Bad Wolf, the Witch, Cruella de Vil, and Stromboli. The group sings what I believe is an original song about how much they love being bad, and Maleficent gets a rare verse to herself.
It's so keen being mean. Nothing's quite as awesome as an evil queen playing with fire, turning folks green. That's my one desire, just being mean.
If that wasn't endearingly cheesy enough for you, check out this reminder that this was indeed the 80s. To everyone's surprise, the villains are touched to be invited, and actually decide to behave themselves at Donald's party. Who knew? Within the theme parks, Maleficent's most notable live appearance will probably always be in the Fantasmic show. What begins as a fun, music-filled romp through Mickey Mouse's dreams is spoiled when a group of villains decide to invade. Although it is the Wicked Queen who begins the invasion, it is Maleficent, voiced by Linda Gary here, who proves to be the biggest challenge. Several versions have been shown over the years: the Disneyland original, the revamped Disneyland version, the Disney World version, and the Tokyo Disney Sea version, but all of them end with Mickey fighting the Maleficent dragon. The dragon itself has gone through several changes, becoming more elaborate over the years, but even in its simplest, most bare-bones early days, it's an imposing sight. Fortunately for us, this is still Mickey's dream, and he knows it. Just like in the original movie, Maleficent makes a habit of interrupting celebrations at the Disney parks. One of these was the grand opening of New Fantasyland in 1983. A few harsh words from Prince Philip are enough to send her away this time, presumably to go home and file down those enormous horns. A grander attempt to ruin the fun was the It's Magical show at Tokyo Disneyland, celebrating the park's 10th anniversary. Mickey and friends are singing about how much they love colors, as you do, when Maleficent comes and drains the color from the dancers. Mickey isn't going to take this lying down, and summons an entire army. Their armor is entirely made of little Mickey Mouse heads, and some of them are on stilts. It's probably not practical, but it's a great image. Maleficent has her own ace up her sleeve and summons a dragon. The dragon looks like the one she's transformed into in the past, but the staging shows them as being separate entities this time. The dragon actually appears to vaporize Mickey and turns its sights on Minnie, who's to be its next victim. When all seems lost, Mickey returns with a magic sword and slays the dragon. Despite being a separate body, Maleficent is apparently still linked to the dragon and appears to die as well. The colors return and everyone celebrates. All in all, a typical day at the Magic Kingdom. Maleficent would strike back for Tokyo Disneyland's 20th anniversary show, Mickey's Gift of Dreams. In this show, Mickey has a magical living sack that can grant the wishes of his friends. Goofy has an adventurous jungle-themed wish, Minnie's is romantic and princess-themed, and Donald has a crazy carnival-themed wish. All of these are accompanied by some very elaborate dance routines, with cameos by many other Disney characters. Eventually, the party is crashed by the Wicked Queen, Hades, and Maleficent. Mickey rallies everyone to chant "Dreams Come True," which helps to shoo away the villains. If this sounds familiar, it's because the show was remade for Walt Disney World a few years later, as Dream Along with Mickey, albeit a bit scaled down. Maleficent still makes an effort to turn everyone's happy dreams into nightmares, but gets defeated in the same way. Maleficent has appeared in a few musical reviews over the years, again causing trouble. In the Feel the Magic show at Tokyo, she teams up with Ursula and Jafar. Instead of goons, Maleficent appears to have the three hyenas working as her henchmen. She orders them to capture Minnie and Donald, which they instantly accomplish. At least, I'm assuming that's what's going on, given that the dialogue is all in Japanese. The two heroes find themselves at the mercy of inflatable versions of Ursula, Snake Jafar, and Dragon Maleficent before Mickey saves the day again. Tokyo Disney apparently loves using Maleficent, since she also appears in the One Man's Dream show during their villain section. Notably, a few goons get in on the action in one of their only live appearances at the theme parks. In the Villains Tonight show on the Disney Cruise Lines, Hades finds himself feeling less evil after being defeated by Hercules. His villainy is called into question by the Fates, who warn him that if he can't regain his evil ways, he'll lose control of the underworld. Hades tries to gather all the villains he can, and very wisely is sure to send an invite to Maleficent. Unfortunately for him, he tasks Pain and Panic with delivering the invitation, even though the imps have a pretty poor track record of getting things done. They do manage to find Maleficent, but only after they find the Wicked Queen. It turns out that the two villainesses are rivals, and apparently, they've both had romantic flings with Hades in the past, something they weren't aware the other one had done. For this reason, the ladies initially refuse to see Hades. In the end, they do decide to help him rediscover his inner evil. After all, if he did lose the underworld, it would be a moral victory for the powers of good, and they can't have that. But it's not just live shows. Maleficent has been a staple in the park's countless parades as well. The Flights of Fantasy parade in Disneyland had her standing atop a tower alongside her dragon form. Diablo is seen perching nearby, and most impressive of all, 3 enormous inflatable goons lead the way. The dragon has been a popular set piece. A light-up version was in Tokyo Disneyland's Fantillusion. A mechanical steampunk version was seen in Disneyland Paris' Stars on Parade, and Walt Disney World's Festival of Fantasy. This float could actually breathe fire, and infamously actually caught on fire in one Disney World performance. Thankfully, no one was hurt. For Maleficent, Halloween is the most wonderful time of the year, and she's been found at many seasonal events at the parks. She's the headliner in Disneyland Paris's Maleficicious Halloween Party, although the main focus of that dance show is Dr. Facilier. The Shadow Man looks to Maleficent and other classic villains to teach him how to be the most effectively evil. I think most of us can agree, though, that he's already a pretty top-notch villain. And he can play the guitar, too. Another Paris show called It's Good to Be Bad with the Disney Villains had Maleficent as the host in its first year, 2015. All subsequent performances lacked Maleficent entirely. To add insult to injury, the 2018 version of the show had Donald Duck in a Maleficent costume. For once, I wouldn't blame the real Maleficent for showing up to get revenge on not being included. Similarly, the Disney World show Villains Mix and Mingle originally had Maleficent as a host, with Dr. Facilier taking over hosting duties in 2011. Maleficent is still at least present in this new version, unlike over in Paris. It's a little surprising that it took so long for Disney to acknowledge the cult following behind Hocus Pocus, but the Sanderson sisters finally got their own Halloween show in 2015, called the Hocus Pocus Villain Spectacular. Maleficent crashes the party halfway through, again miffed that she wasn't invited, but the Sandersons nervously admit that they didn't think she'd find them worthy of visiting. Their flattery works, and Maleficent helps them conjure more villains to join the fun. As I do these retrospectives, it's a lot of fun to see which plot points and personality aspects of the villains make it into different media. For Captain Hook, it seemed like all his appearances ended with him being chased by the crocodile, and for Maleficent, it seems like a good deal of her appearances begin with her not being invited somewhere. Most of them end with her turning into a dragon. I am starting to wonder, though, why Maleficent is so intent on crashing these parties time and time again. Most of the time, it seems like she wouldn't have enjoyed herself if she was invited in the first place. I suppose it's just par for the course of being a villain. Unsurprisingly, Maleficent is a very popular character to use in video games, often as one of the main antagonists. In my Alice in Wonderland villains video, I mentioned that in the original Japanese version of the Nintendo game Mickey Mousecapade, the Queen of Hearts was the final boss. The US release changed her to a rather bulky-looking Maleficent. In Epic Mickey, The Power of Illusion, the main villainess takes the form of several Disney villains, her main form being Maleficent. The villainess is actually a witch named Miserabelle, who first appeared in the Sega game Castle of Illusion. In that game, she resembled the witch from Snow White, and kidnapped Minnie to steal her beauty. Although Castle of Illusion ends with the characters parting on friendly terms, Power of Illusion has Miserabelle finding herself in the wastelands for forgotten Disney characters. Angry, she kidnaps many well-known characters from franchises and traps them in her castle. And who better to masquerade as than Maleficent herself? Statues of Maleficent can be seen in the castle, the Goons patrol the halls, and the final battle is against Miserabelle as the Maleficent Dragon. In the Game Boy Advance game, simply titled Disney Princess, Maleficent naturally serves as the main villain of the Aurora section. The princess first has to track down her 3 fairy friends, who have been turned into butterflies by Maleficent. Along the way, she runs into the usual array of goons, who she is able to put to sleep using the fairies' wands. After that, Aurora must free her castle from Maleficent, which has been overrun with thorns. Finally, Aurora must take on Maleficent herself, with some help from Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. It's pretty interesting to see Aurora personally fight Maleficent for a change. In the Super Nintendo game, Mickey no Tokyo Disneyland Diaboken, Pete appears to have taken over the park and kidnapped Mickey's friends. At least that's what I'm assuming is happening. The game was never released outside of Japan and has no English translation. The final level is based on the Cinderella Castle Mystery Tour. Armed with an endless arsenal of balloons, Mickey braves the dungeons to save the day. Along the way, he encounters many of the villains seen during the tour: the Magic Mirror, the Wicked Witch, ghosts, and haunted suits of armor. Most relevant to this video is the dozens of goons that Mickey fights. A game entirely based on the Cinderella Castle Mystery Tour was released on the Game Boy, again in Japan only. This one has Pluto getting lost in the castle, and Mickey setting out to find him. It's very much like the Super Nintendo game, with Mickey using balloons to help him get around and fight enemies. Once again, Maleficent's goons act as fairly common enemies, and at times, shopkeepers. Although the Horned King is the final boss, Maleficent herself appears as a boss about halfway through the game. Other Disney villains get in on the act too. The Wicked Witch and her own Raven fight Mickey at her secret lab. Portraits of Stromboli come to life and throw things at Mickey. Maleficent was a playable character in the Disney Infinity game, although this was specifically the Angelina Jolie version. Jolie did not provide her voice, however, with that role being filled by Raja Barodi.
Well, I'm sure a chat with you would be lovely. If I were interested, that is.
Maleficent appears as the main villain of the mobile game, Disney Magic Kingdoms, cursing the theme parks and inspiring countless Disney characters to come together to restore the magic. Ah, but speaking of kingdoms and crossovers, we've reached the big one here. I've talked about Kingdom Hearts in previous videos, but out of all the Disney villains, Maleficent has played the biggest role in the game's story. For this reason, although Maleficent is not the main villain of the franchise itself, she's arguably the main Disney villain. I have personally only played through Kingdom Hearts 2 in its entirety, and although I enjoyed it, I did find the plot a little hard to follow at times. I'll do my best with this one, but keep in mind that this is still a video focusing on Maleficent first and foremost. Let's take a deep breath and dive to the heart of this franchise. In the first game, Maleficent leads her own sinister six of Disney villains to try to capture and control an entity called Kingdom Hearts, which will give them untold power. She takes a lost young man named Riku under her wing, offering to help him save his friend Kairi if he helps her. Riku, already vulnerable at this point, is easily manipulated by Maleficent, and further corrupted by the franchise's main villain, Xehanort. Maleficent has updated her minions here. No longer is she assisted by occasionally helpful but rather stupid goons. Now she has beings of darkness called Heartless that make for much more dangerous foes. But Maleficent is overconfident in her abilities. The darkness behind the Heartless is too much for her to control, no matter how powerful and evil she is. A corrupted Riku, in a misguided attempt to stop his friend Sora, stabs Maleficent in her own black heart with his Keyblade to unleash the darkness within. Maleficent transforms into a dragon, but gets defeated anyway by the heroes. In Kingdom Hearts 2, Diablo makes his first appearance in the series, depositing a familiar black robe in front of the good fairies. Just the fairies reminiscing about Maleficent is enough to apparently resurrect her. There was some explanation given in one of the side games involving time travel, but I really don't feel like investigating that too much. For the sake of this video, Maleficent is back, and she needs a new base of operations. Although Diablo will still make a few small appearances in the games, Maleficent's main henchman in the Kingdom Hearts series is none other than Mickey's archenemy, Pete. As I said in the first one of these villains retrospectives, Pete is often as competent as the plot needs him to be, and Kingdom Hearts shows him as being bumbling, but sometimes effective. He's at least good enough for Maleficent to keep him around. Even when he misunderstands her orders, fails a job, or wants to run from battle, she's pretty patient with him. For whatever reason, Pete's pros outweigh his cons, as far as Maleficent is concerned. Although she appears frequently throughout Kingdom Hearts 2, Maleficent plays a smaller role in the story overall. One of her dastardly plans involves destroying Christmas Town, since, as we've established, every villain worth their salt tries to take down Santa at some point. She's already tried in multiple comics, why not try again? She actually helps Sora and his friends a few times, but she makes it painfully clear that she's only doing it for her own selfish reasons. She holds off some rival villains so Sora can escape at one point. Later on, she and Pete decide to steal the evil Organization 13's enormous castle to use as their own, so they fight off the Heartless to once again allow Sora to fight the other villains. Birth by Sleep offers a look back into the events before the first game. Here, Maleficent has just put Aurora to sleep, and is starting to look into the idea of hearts and the powers they possess. Because this is before she begins using Heartless as her minions, her goons do make an appearance as her personal army. Although there are many different forms of goons in the movie, the game opts to only use models for the pig and bird ones. The events in the game largely follow the original movie's plot, with Philip escaping Maleficent's dungeon and fighting her as a dragon in front of Aurora's thorny castle. Since this is a prequel, Maleficent survives the battle and is seen limping away in her normal dark fairy form afterward. She is told that love will always conquer evil, and in typical Maleficent fashion, she ignores this inevitability. In the later games, Maleficent realizes that trying to control the Kingdom Hearts is too much trouble and decides to change her tactics. Her new world domination scheme involves finding the Book of Prophecies, a relic that holds just as much power as the Hearts. Throughout the most recent major game, Kingdom Hearts 3, she and Pete are on the hunt for the book, and the box that supposedly contains it. Presumably, this plot will continue in further installments. And that about wraps up the long, mostly evil career of Maleficent. I know there were a few cameos here and there that I didn't cover, but this video is long enough as it is. This character, this perfect embodiment of spite and villainy, truly lives up to her title as the Mistress of All Evil. She's definitely the kind of villain that sticks with you from a very young age. My personal earliest memories of Maleficent were in the Disneyland Fun sing-along tape, where she absolutely terrified me. My mom mentioned that when she was a little girl, she had a Sleeping Beauty coloring book and used an entire black crayon on one picture of Maleficent. That's the kind of dedication this villain deserves. The next animated Disney movie to come out after Sleeping Beauty was 101 Dalmatians. Cruella de Vil is almost as legendary as Maleficent, and some might argue that she's even more so. I imagine that will be another big video, so I'd like to do a shorter villains entry in the meantime. It's my list, so I make the rules. In this upcoming bonus entry, we're going beyond the screen to the theme parks. Pirates and phantoms await us as we look at the Disney Parks villains.
Look harder. You see, he lives in you.